That help?
Now I hear you.
Now you hear me. Okay.
Now we're good.
Makes a difference when I turn the microphone on. So nobody heard me on the live streams over there, but everybody heard me on Periscope, so whatever. Anyways, normally Pastor Ken does the opening and introduction, and he's not here today, so I'm going to forego the normal Pastor Ken introductions, as usual. That's his forte, and I love it when he does it. So I want to look at a couple things today and talk about this. I want to talk about the fact that there's no manual. There is no manual. I was meditating on this about the idea that we have made the word Bible into an acronym. And the most common acronym that is made out of the word Bible is Basic Instructions Before Leaving Earth. Now, I don't want to get into that part of the debate, but the last two words, the last two words on there are not even right, because we were created to be on the earth, and so even if we depart for a momentary, we're going to be back here. We're going to be in created bodies, and there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and we're going to be here on earth again. So I don't even want to get into that debate and that aspect of it. It's the kingdom of heaven coming down, not us necessarily escaping from the earth, and that's a mentality in the church that we've got to move beyond. But beyond that, I wanted to look at the idea that we have what the acronym says and what they've come up with in the church is basic instructions before whatever. Basic instructions. And I was meditating on that and talking with the Lord, and I said, you know, Lord, it's not even really, it is basic instructions, but it's not even really basic instructions for living a life. It's basic instructions for a religious observation and for everything like that. And as I was meditating on talking with the Lord, I said, you know, we were going back and forth, and he said, really, and I had this theme in my mind of there is no manual. There's no manual for life. Even when we say the Bible is basic instructions before leaving earth, there's no manual. When you get a new product, you pop it out, you get a manual. And that's so you can do what? You can do the basic operations, you can function with it, you know, it gives you some tidbits to do everything. And that's fine. And that's kind of the way we're looking at the Bible is there's an overview. There's, I know when I get something new, a piece of electronic equipment or anything that you purchase new, generally what they have is they have a big manual in there, which is in depth, and then they have a quick manual. When we get a new cell phone or we get a new computer or something like that, or even when I bought my truck, there was a quick start, you know, quick familiarization, but then there's an in-depth manual, more in-depth. And the meditation that I have on there is, okay, in life, there's no manual. Really, there's no manual. And people say, well, you got your Bible. Yes, but this doesn't tell you those things that are the most essential parts of it. And what I came to this understanding, and it's something that I always talk about, but you have to experience it. And it comes back to experience. And I said, Lord, what's the key to this, the fact that we have no manual? And he said, if you don't pay attention, and we've been talking about this pretty much for the month of August going into September now, he said, if you don't pay attention and you don't take the opportunities to learn, you're not going to succeed. You're not going to make it because there is no manual. You weren't born and handed a manual. As much as we would like to believe that we have been given a manual, like we do when we buy a new piece of equipment, you're not a piece of equipment. You're a creation of God. You're a human being, and you weren't given a manual when you came out. And I was thinking about this as we've dealt with some family things recently, and just thinking about how I think back of my grandfathers and my mother and my grandfather and grandmother and the generations and all the different people and how they're all involved family-wise. And I was thinking about that we all have difficulties with each other. And we have difficulties with ourselves. And I was thinking about how the statement was made, he's a good person, did the best he could. It wasn't perfect. Did the best he could with what he had. Wasn't perfect. And I was listening to that statement over and over again. I'm like, yeah, did the best they could, not perfect. Did the best they could, not perfect. And I was thinking about that. And that's when I began to talk to the Lord, and I said, that's because there's no manual. I used to say to my kids when they were little, and we would have issues that came up, disciplinary issues, things like that, you know, difficulties and disagreements. And I would say to them, many times I would say, look, you got to work with me here. I'm learning to be a dad as you're learning to be a kid. So we got to work together. There is no manual for me to do this. Yes, certainly there are people that have written books, but all of that is supposed to add to what we're doing, and you're supposed to experience it. And that's what the key that I came up with from the Lord was how important it is to maximize the dynamics in our relationships. How important it is to pay attention to what we're doing in our relationships, because those are your true learning experiences. Those are the things that you truly learn in those relationships. And I think there's a number of people that I'm connected with that they have difficulties in their relationships, and I know that that's one of the reasons I'm connected with them, is to help them to get back and rehabilitate relationships in their lives. And I think I look at them and I go, man, you're missing out on so much. I talked about it last week. I talked about how we're all mirrors for each other. Well, if you forsake relationships, if you hide out, if you I'm only going to be friends with this one or two people, and granted, we only all have really one or two close friends in our lifetimes, and those friends may even change. But we have many, many acquaintances and many people that we can connect with, and they are our mirrors. They can be those people that give us a sense of self, because we're seeing our effect on them, and it's reflecting back to us. And so what I wanted to talk about, a couple things, and I have to read my own scriptures today since Pastor Ken's not here. I always like to tease him because he's so faithful and always good, and I enjoy it so much when he does it. But in Acts chapter 17, Paul's speaking in Athens, and it's a place of high idolatry. And he says, verse 24, chapter 17, verse 24, he said, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He does not live in temples built by hands, and he is not served by humans' hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives men life and breath and everything else." So Paul makes if you read the subtlety there, he's saying God is not served by man as if he needs it. He is served by man, but not from a place of needing it. So let's make that caveat, because a lot of people get a lot of things misunderstood. Anyways, verse 26, from one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the set times for them and the exact places that they should live. Now here's the key that I wanted to get to. He determined the set times and the exact places that they should live. Why? God did this, verse 27, God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from any of us. He's not far from each one of us. So why did God do all these things? Why does he set us up in the places that he sets us up in? So that we would reach out and we would find him. I was meditating on this and saying, okay, Lord, that's the key to this. There's no manual. There's no set of instructions for your life that you can just grab, pick up, and go on autopilot and do it. There's no, hey, insert slot, tab A into slot A and tab B into slot B and C and, so on. That's easy because somebody else has already done the engineering for you. Somebody else has already put it together. But the reality is you need to know, we've got to move in our mindset from thinking that we're just receiving a product and putting it together. I'm just going to get the information and put it together. No, you've got to discover the totality of what that product is. You've got to become an inventor. Let's say it that way. Not that you're inventing your life or inventing things, but you've really got to take the position of an inventor and go, you know what? I'm going to take this thing completely. I don't have a manual. I'm going to take this thing completely apart, down to all its elements, clean it, look at it, and then put it all back together. It's one thing for you to get something new and learn how to use it from its outward interface. How to push the buttons on the outside. I'm the type of person, and my mom can testify to this, that I have always torn things apart. I haven't always been successful in putting them back together, but I've always torn things apart. Just because I was so inquisitive, I wanted to see how it worked. And as I've grown and gotten older, things have gotten smaller and more cosmetic or more microscopic and more less accessible. And so now there's little parts. But I'm still able to tear things apart to a certain level. And my wife can testify how many things I fix that I can get this part and get that part and tear it apart, tear the whole thing apart and put this new part in there. And I actually have done several iPods, bought them broken, fixed one part, sold them as refurbished because that's what they were. But my point is, I've always been inquisitive to get in there and dig it apart, dig in there and tear it apart and find out how it works, so that I can have a better understanding of how I'm using it and what its capabilities are. Whereas a lot of people don't have that inquisitive, and I understand that. But in this life, if you don't at least take a little bit of time to dig in and tear things apart and assess them, you're not going to walk into your fullness. You're not going to walk in the fullness of your purpose. And that's one of the main things that I wanted to touch on today, was to say there's no manual. So if you don't do any investigation, you're going to stick on this autopilot. You're going to keep stumbling and tripping and walking all over these things. And you're going to not walk in all the fullness of your purpose. And it's easy, isn't it? It's easy to go on autopilot and just be oblivious to how you're affecting people and what you're doing and just act a certain way and not have any consciousness of how much that hurt that person or affected that person or whatever it did, and just keep going and think it's all good. And yet, that's not successful. The most successful people, and I'm not just talking money, but people that can pass away with a healthy, happy life without regrets. You know, we know people that can pass away and they're doing it, and they've got regrets. I should have done that better. I should have done this better. The people that can pass, I stand here today without regrets, in that I don't. We all have things that we wish we could have done better, obviously, but I don't have regrets from the standpoint of I assessed it and I've learned from it. See, I think the only time you really have the biggest regrets, we all have regrets on a just general level. I think the biggest regrets we have are the ones that we keep repeating, because they're compounded. When you've got difficulties in your relationships and you're advanced in years, you shouldn't have those types of difficulties. You should have moved into a place where you've learned enough to be a peacemaker and be the one who advances, making amends and redeeming situations. And yet we find people that are incapable of doing that. And what I look back on is there's no manual. They don't have the basics, like we said, basic instructions. They think, I got the basic instructions, so I'm all good to go. No, you need to have some experience. You need to have somebody that's gone through it before you. I think of, can't remember the exact succession, but Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates. Now, if I say those names, the majority of people know at least the names: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. But most people don't know that they were directly connected. Here are three of the most well-known philosophers in Greek history, and they were proteges. That's why I said I can't remember the lines, but one of them, Aristotle trained Plato and Plato trained Socrates, or however the line worked. They trained each other. They were students and teachers and students, but they were collaborators. And they worked together, and they developed some of the most powerful philosophies and ideas that are still are practical today, still in operation today. And I think that's that mentality. And I think of course, as I was meditating on this, thinking about Ezekiel or Elijah and Elisha, thinking of all the people that have passed on before, Moses to Joshua, all these people that have had these depths of connections, these fathering, mentoring relationships. And I think those are the relationships. And I think it was what Peter was talking about. He said, the empty way of life handed down to you by your forefathers. It's an empty way because you didn't get anything from it. In Matthew chapter 17, Jesus is confronted with a situation. And I wanted to read this one phrase that he says, but there's a whole context here. In chapter 17, verse 14, he says, and when they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. He said, Lord, have mercy on my son. That's verse 15. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. Now, here's the key. The disciples were given basic instructions. What? Cast out devils, heal the sick, raise the dead, preach the gospel. Those were the basic instructions they were given. They were given these basic instructions. They went out and they did them, but they weren't always successful. Now, here's Jesus coming in. And in verse 18, it says he rebuked the demon. Just that simple. He rebuked the demon, it came out of the boy, and he was healed from that moment. Verse 19, and when the disciples said to Jesus in private, because they obviously were misunderstanding what was going on. They're like, wait a minute, how come what's the situation here? And he says, in private, they said, why couldn't we drive it out? And he said, because you have so little faith. I tell you the truth, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to the mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. So, how many people know that scripture, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed? A lot of people in church. If you've been in church for any length of time, you've probably heard, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move a mountain, right? But you've got to read the context of what Jesus is saying here. He's saying if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to the mountain, but it's within a rebuke. He's saying, look, they're saying, why couldn't we do this? You sent us out with these basic instructions to do this. And he says, beyond the basic instructions, you didn't have any faith. And if you really look up the word faith, it means trust. You're trusting in the Lord. And he says, you didn't have the basic trust or the smallest element of trust that when you operated in the basic instructions, that it would be accomplished when you did it. And that's the response. He said, Lord, why couldn't we do it? Because you didn't have any faith. You had the basic instructions, but you didn't have any faith. So basic instructions is not going to get you all of what you need. And again, I'm saying it today, there's no manual. You can't just put up, and I've come across people and I hear it in their tone, and when they're talking to me, they're like, man, I just wish we could just, write a manual. And I'm writing, I'm writing stuff and preparing books and going to eventually have them published. And I'm writing them, I'm like, Lord, the last thing I want to do is for somebody to turn this into a manual. Something where they can read, the 12 points of how to do this and go on autopilot and not do this because, again, he sets the set time and places for men so that hopefully, by some means, somehow, some way, they might actually seek him. Because it's that depth of relationship. I cannot experience, or I cannot get from a book what I need to experience from God. The book can give me a basic idea, a basic concept, and get me going, but it can't give me the fullness of what I need to get all of what and it's that breakdown. And here's a key to this. In Hebrews chapter 12, this is one of my passages that I love to go to quite a bit. But in Hebrews 12, it says to endure hardship. Verse 7, it says, endure hardship as discipline. God's treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? And if you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you're an illegitimate children and not true sons. Moreover, we all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respect them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? So, but the key to this is endure hardship as discipline. That's the key. The key to it is not God's disciplining you. If the Lord showed up and just said, I need to discipline you, most of us would go, okay, I recognize that. But when we go through something and we endure it, a hardship, we don't always recognize it as a discipline. And that's what the writer of Hebrews is saying here is endure hardship as if it were discipline, because then you can learn something from it. Now, we've all experienced hardship in one way or another. If you actually would learn from that hardship and go through it and properly understand it, and get as much as you can out of it, you'll learn from it. You'll grow from it. You'll be better for it because there wasn't a manual for you to go into it. Here's the thing. I had recently changed spark plugs on a truck. It's the first time I ever did it. So I had to go to it 3 or 4 times. I went to it and looked it up first and then looked it up again on how to change it. Now you think spark plug changing is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But there was some little nuances, there were some little things, and I was even in the midst of changing it. Changed one side and then went to the other side of the engine and was going to change the other side, and I was encountering some difficulties. So I got on YouTube again and somebody had posted a video and I watched the video and I got some insight. But then I still had to do it. I watched the video and I said, oh, okay, is that how that? And then I went ahead and I went, oh, and I figured it out. So I needed to have some basic instruction, some insight, somebody else's experience, and then I also needed to actually get in there and do it. Couldn't just tell them how to do it. And it's that simple. It comes down to that of you can have the basic instructions, but then you've got to walk it out. You've got to go through it. And so now the next time I go to change the spark plugs, it's going to be very easy because I've already done it. I've experienced it. And that's what we're talking about in this life. There's no manual for you to just shortchange the experience and you just walk through it and do it. And really, nobody of note in this world ever did the same thing as the last guy who did it. People who are renowned, people of note, people of stature have done something that nobody else did before, or they did it better. They exceeded the last guy. Well, you can't have a manual on how to exceed into something that nobody else has ever done before. You can have a basic idea, some basic instructions on how to get there, but you're not going to have all the fullness and all of it that you need to get into it. So what I'm talking about today is, you know what? We can have the basic instructions, go out, cast out devils. But if you don't combine it with faith, if you don't have any trust in what you're doing, you're not going to get all the fullness of what God wants us to get. And that's the key, is value your relationships. Maximize your relationships. Yeah, you're going to have relationships with difficult people. You're going to have people that have issues. But how do you value those relationships? How do you value yourself in those relationships? How do you work in those? Are you looking to maximize that relationship in such a way that it benefits you and the other person? Definitely you, because you can't always tell the other person what to do. But how are you working on that? Because it's in those relationships and in those experiences that we truly gain an understanding of ourselves and our surroundings and what we're supposed to be doing, because there is no manual. Amen? Amen. All right, so that's it today, real quick today. Pastor Ken didn't do his normal thing, so you're getting it short and sweet today. I hope that really encourages. I believe it will encourage somebody, many people out there, because otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it. I don't just get up here and talk for the sake of talking. Those of you watching by Periscope or watching us on the live stream, obviously those of us here know the operation, but those of you watching by Periscope or live stream, we have a couple different ways of giving. We always appreciate your support in what you're doing. It helps us continue our operation and do our live streams cost money and equipment costs money, but beyond that, there's an honor and there's an obedience. And whether you're operating out of one or the other, we don't operate out of guilt and out of necessity. The Lord provides all of our needs, but sometimes He uses you to provide those needs. And so for those of you that are watching live stream, I believe the picture is up, and you can see right on there. For those of you on Periscope, you can text HFTC to the number 77977 and follow the instructions there. And whatever the Lord lays on your heart to give, we appreciate that. We receive it, and we speak over those things to be multiplied back into your life. And beyond that, I don't think we have any other announcements. Everybody have a good Labor Day tomorrow. We're going to have a good Labor Day with family here and enjoy our relationships and have a good time. We're continuing to do more work on Mom's garage. She's ecstatic about the work. I've got to do some more drywall mudding and getting it going. And one day we'll transition from meeting in Mom's garage and we'll transition somewhere else. But Mom will have a nice garage that's all done, and she can come out here and do her workout exercises with nobody peeking at her in a nice, cool environment. So that's all we have for everybody today. God bless you, and we'll see you again soon.